Hey YouTube. Well, it's pretty cloudy in Pennsylvania this morning and we're supposed to have rain by around 5 o'clock. So I want to see if I can't get cleaned up here. I've got a couple of finishing touches to do on the chicken coop and I want to get that done as well. Guys, let me tell you a little story here quick. See this driveway? Back in, I think it was 2003, what this was all groated and everything. There were some small saplings and a couple wider trees, maybe 6 inches or so, like the size of that one crooked pine there. And what happened was, this was a staging area where my house sits, was a staging area for a logger and the trucks. They would pull in here, load up, and then take off. And when I came here and saw that, I didn't want to cut any more trees down than I had to, so I used the staging area to set the house. Now I did have to cut trees because I widened everything. It wasn't near as big as the house takes up and all. But what I want to say is, when I was clearing this driveway and I was by myself, and at the time I was about 200 miles away from home, I grabbed a hold of a 6-inch log, maybe about 12 foot long, and I picked it up and I went to throw it out of my way. I didn't pick the whole thing up, I'm talking about one end. And when I threw it, I hurt my back. Just like that. I had never had back problems all my life, and this was when I was, I don't know, around 55, I guess. I'm just guessing at that time, but anyway. I hurt my back, and I want to tell you, I sat up here on a bucket and cried. I was in such freaking pain. Never experienced pain like that, never want to again. However, for 3 months after that, I couldn't do a thing. I was in bed for 3 months straight. There were times when I was in such friggin' pain, and I didn't realize that, because I never had back problems. I know I had sore backs, but not, like that. So, what I'm getting at here is, when you see me lifting and carrying stuff, you have to watch me, because I do put my knees against things for support in that, and there's a lot of things that if you pick up and toss like I do, you need to be careful. And I try to be careful, and I haven't had a problem since then. All it was a matter of, I think I was out of shape, because at that time I had been mostly doing, office stuff. But I think I was out of shape when I came up here to do this, and I'm just telling you, it was something. I was in really bad pain. So, it's not that a person is invincible, it's that you just have to watch how you handle stuff. Okay guys, in order to pass inspection, I had to put what we call a slider so that she can open and close to be able to see what's going on in there, and they get cross ventilation. I also had to put a window in so that they can have light. And then what's going on over here is I put a door there that's really not going to do much once those chickens are big enough to be able to let out. I'll put a ramp there and I'll leave that door open, and then they can all intermingle with whatever they want to do. That's Millie and Molly. I can't tell the difference either. So the chickens are in there, and that's the end of that story. Now I gotta clean up. Okay guys, since I gotta clean this up and I'll be sitting still for a little bit, I'm going to have a talk about the size and dimensions of wood. Alright, first of all, for those of you who may not know this, when you go down to Walmart, or not Walmart, Lowe's, when you go to Lowe's and you go to Home Depot, when you buy a 2x4, the 2x4 is not 2 inches by 4 inches. There was a time in history when they were, but now they're not. So a 2x4 is normally 1.5 by 3.5, and with the metric system, they're getting even smaller than that. So anyway, 1.5 by 3.5. So a 2 by 4, okay, is 1.5 by 2.5 or 3.5 by whatever length. When you go to a place like Home Depot, Lowe's, whatever, okay, that's what you get there. So the whole thing about, you know, what size wood should you cut, that depends on a lot of things. Now, first of all, we'll talk about softwood, because that's what I like cutting anyway. When you talk about softwood or framing lumber, all of the stuff that you buy at Lowe's or Home Depot, 99% of it is going to be either 1 by or 2 by. That's the thickness, all right? So a 1 by, which is 1 inch, would not be a full inch anymore. It's a 3/4 of an inch. So, for instance, like this board here that I'm holding, there's a piece glued to it, but what I'm holding here would be considered a 1 by. Now this is actually 1 inch here. It's a full 1 inch. But just because this is an inch that I cut on the sawmill, if you plane this down, you could get it down to 3/4 of an inch by taking 1/8 of an inch off of both sides. And basically that's the way this works. The sawmill guy cuts the wood a full inch, and then it goes to the planer. Now, they may, depending on the wood, it could be slightly thinner, it could be slightly thicker. The point is that it's all 1 inch when you get it from when the mill cuts it. Now, having the Woodmizer, if you think about this, the Woodmizer is a custom saw. So what does custom mean? Custom means you can cut anything you want, and that's basically what is great about the Woodmizer. Now, if you tear apart any old houses, you'll see that there's all kind of different sizes. If you have a house that's you know, like an old farmhouse or whatever, you could have boards in there that are 3 inches thick, 2 inches thick, 1.5 inches thick, because cutting with the circular mill at that time, you know, during that period in history, they weren't able to cut things as accurately as we can cut them now with all the precision equipment that we have today. But anyway, let me just say this. The Woodmizer is a custom bandsaw. You can cut any size you want. There's no rhyme or reason to have to cut a given size when you have the Woodmizer, except for what are you cutting it to do? Okay, now let's step back again, back to framing lumber. When you have framing lumber is the size of framing lumber comes under two things. Well, let's talk about one thing. First of all, framing lumber is made according to what it can carry. In other words, like 2x6s, when you're framing out a house, 2x6s should never span more than 9 foot 9 inches. Okay, so you'd want to jump to 2x8s. But if you're under 9 foot 9 in a span, 2x6s, you know, a regular grade of 2x6s, premium or standard grade, can fit the bill for that. Now, I know a guy, and he was sort of foolish, but he built a deck, and he made the deck 24 feet wide. And because he could buy 24-foot boards, now a lot of people don't know you can get that, 24-footers. You can buy 2x6s 24 feet long. Just because you can buy them doesn't mean you should use them for the span. A 2x6, 24 foot long, will sag in the middle something fierce, and if there's any kind of stress at all in it, like any knot holes or any imperfections, it will break. You cannot span that far. So what you got to do is you got to go and learn about what the span distances are for wood. Okay? Same thing with a 2x4. Just because a 2x4 comes 16 feet long doesn't mean you can use it for ceiling joists, 16 foot. Now, you can use it if you make like let's say this is a 2x4, right, and this one here is a 2x4. If you make a truss and you put attaching points on there, like say here to there, here to here, and it's all an engineering thing, but with a little experience you can learn how to do it. And you don't need to use the math to figure it out. You can just put a couple boards here and there and you'll actually make a truss yourself. Now you can do that, but just because the boards are 16 foot long does not mean that you should be spanning 16 foot with them. That's number one, and that's an important one. Okay, so getting back to the size of the boards. 1x is normally 1 inch thick at the mill. It's 3/4 of an inch when you go to the store to buy it. Now, it all depends on the store you're going to. If you go to a store that is geared for furniture makers, you could have 5/4 wood fork. First of all, let me just talk about the quarter things. When you say 3/4, okay, that's 3/4 of an inch. 4/4 means 1 inch, 5/4 means 1 1/4 inches, 6/4 means 1 1/2 inches, and so on and so forth. It's just a term that they use to express the thickness. When you're talking about hardwood and you're talking about you know, wood for making furniture, the dimensions can be whatever the designer of the furniture wants. I mean, like on the siding of the chicken coop, for instance, I cut the siding 1/2 inch thick because it's being supported every 15 inches. There's nowhere to where there's bigger than 14 inches or 15 inches away from the board. So with that known, I figured 1/2 inch is plenty thick enough rather than using an inch board. So what that did was double up my amount of wood I could get out of a, you know, out of a board. That's the great thing about having the Woodmizer. You can make these decisions at the spur of a moment, and you don't have to suffer from it. Okay. Now, some of the other things too is like let's say 2x4s. We know, I just got done telling you that a 2x4 is not 2 inches by 4 inches when you cut it or when you buy it at Lowe's, but when you make, oh boy, when you make 2x4s for yourself, like say to build, I don't know, say you want to build your garage. If you want to make a full-size 2x4 and you want to use them to build your garage, there's no reason why you can't. That system that you're using is called a full nominal system. In other words, you're using a full-size 2x4. The only difference is when you go to you know, calculate the distances of things. Like if you use a regular 2x4, it's a lot easier, and I like working with that because it is easier. It's a lot easier to use a 2x4 for all your dimensions, window sizes. Everything's going to come to normally like a full inch or maybe 1/2 inch, stuff like that. But when you work with a board that's 2.5 inches or 3.5 inch 2x4 by 1.5 inches, and some of them are even slightly less than that, when you start working with a big project, you end up with, if you don't have the same system of wood, you're going to be pulling your hair out trying to match things up. Because if you have a 2x4, like this is a 2x3, but if, let's say you have a 2x4 here, okay, and then you have a 2x4 from the factory, which is, let's say this is the width of the 2x4 from the Lowe's. You notice there's a difference there, okay, of like 1/2 inch. So when you start measuring and you start nailing these together, if you have different width and different width this direction as well, boards, and you're trying to intermingle the store-bought 3.5 inch boards with the custom cut 4 inch boards, you're not going to be able to work. It's going to slow you, stop you down, you'll have a mess. Now, you can work with that. You can put all the boards, if you're not doing the inside like on this chicken coop, you can mix 2x4s and 2x3s because you can keep one side flat. Okay, this is getting into a lot more than I wanted it to get into because I just wanted to stay with the size of the lumber. But things like that can be figured out. But anyway, let me get back to the lumber size. So, with 2x, you have 2x2s, 2x3s, 2x4s, 2x6, 2x8, 2x10s, and 2x12s. Okay, that's what you have. That's the normal standard size any lumber yard would carry. All of them, starting from the beginning, you have 1.5 inch by 1.5 for a 2x2, or actually 1.5 by 1.5, yeah, for a 2x2. 1.5 by 3.5 for a 2x4. 1.5 by 2.5 for a 2x3. 1.5 by 5.5 for a 2x6, and that goes up like that. So it goes with 1.5, 2.5, 3.5, 5.5, 7.5 would be a 2x8. 8.5 would be a 9.5 would be a 2x10. And then once you get to 2x10s, for some unknown friggin' reason, probably from shrinkage, 2x12s are actually 11.25 inches wide by 1.5 inches thick. If you're not knowing this, and you go to make a window header out of a 2x12, for instance, or anything, and you don't know that it's going to be 1.25 inches narrower than the previous 2x10 cut, what's going to happen is you're not going to have things fit right. Now, depends upon how fussy you want to be. Maybe that 1/4 inch doesn't matter to you. But the point is that those are the nominal sizes that you get. So, you know, we're calling it a 2x4, but it's actually 1.5 inches by 3.5. And like I say, nowadays it's even slightly less. And that's the headache that comes in with buying lumber. You can buy lumber from one place and it's one size, and you can buy it from another place and it's slightly different. Now, not a lot, and not usually, but sometimes this is what happens. So, you know, when it comes to that, what you want to do is you want to determine the system you're working with. Now, let's say that some guy started building his garage. Let's say my neighbor was building his garage and he bought the lumber somewhere. Okay, now he saw I had a sawmill and he said, can you cut boards for me? If he's going to nail them boards up right away and he's going to nail them up rough sawn, in other words, they're not going to be planed, then what can happen is I can go ahead and I can cut 3.5 inch or maybe 3 5/8 inch boards for him right away so that he can use them nailing them up, and if they'll shrink about as much as the boards that he is using already, because construction lumber, when you buy it, and a lot of people don't realize this, but you carpenters who have had sap on your hands from construction lumber will know that very seldom does construction lumber come less than 19% moisture content. It all depends on where you buy it, okay, and how they stored it. So as far as what size should you make wood, that's up to you. If I want to cut 3/4 inch boards out of something, and 3/4 inch is what I'm actually cutting, a 3/4 inch board, and then I plane it, I'm going to end up with less than 3/4. So I have to know where the board's going when I cut it, okay? So what I try to do is I cut full-size lumber. This way here, if somebody says they want it planed, I can plane it and I don't have to worry about it. So I cut all 1 inches thick, unless I'm doing something special like the siding for the chicken coop. But I cut all 1 inch thick, 2 inch thick, and I use the standard sizes. 2x2, 2x3, 2x4, 2x6, exact size. And whatever length they are, okay? That's what I do. Not everybody does that, because I like having framing lumber on hand. I like having pine, because pine for me, as a builder, or as a previous builder, is a good choice for me to have, because I'm always making something. I mean, this year I added onto the chicken coop. I'm probably going to add onto something else. You know, I built all kinds of things every year. I end up building stuff. So it all depends on what you're going to do with it. But for somebody out there to say, well, you should cut wood this thick or you should cut wood that thick, they don't have a clue as to what they're talking about, unless they're answering a specific question. If you ask the question, I don't have my garage built and I want to cut 2x4s, what size should I cut them? Cut them whatever size you want. You can cut them a full 2 inches by 4 inches, or you could cut them 1.5 inches by 3.5, but no less than that, because once you start cutting boards too small, then you run into the problem of the span and stress and stuff on the wood. You know, if you can't use a 2x3 to do the job of a 2x4. So that's my whole point with, in my opinion, for wood. Now when it comes to hardwood, in most cases hardwood is not handling a lot of those things. I mean, if you're using hardwood and it's actually a real beam in a house or whatever, then you have to cut it according to whatever size you want. But that's the great thing, like I say, about the Woodmizer. You can cut any size you want. You don't have to, you know, do one particular thing. And like I say, depending upon how much lumber you have, I mean, if out of every time you cut a log, you get 2 extra 2x4s, that, because you cut them 1.5 inches by 3.5 inches, wonderful. That's you. That's what you're doing. Okay. For me, it doesn't matter. Just so you don't waste any of the lumber. So if you look at a tree and you say, well, I can get this, I can get that, you first of all have to know all the sizes that are available and all the sizes you could use. So for me, like yesterday when I cut a 1/2 inch off of a 2x6, because the 2x6 was 5/8 of an inch wider than I wanted it, but that's how it ended up off the mill. So I'm glad I left that sit there, and I didn't put it away. I set it on my horses, because my horses mean to me, when I have lumber laying on the horses up there, that means that wood is not done yet, that I can do something with it. I may trim it, I may shave it, I may cut it flat ways. In other words, I might cut 1x out of a 2x by cutting it this direction. I might cut a 2x4 out of it by cutting it this direction. I may cut 1 furring strips by cutting it this direction. But the point is that you cut to a system that you're going to work with. Okay, that's all that is. And you can choose the system. But you do have to know something about wood. If you don't know anything at all about wood, all you're doing is begging for trouble. You need to know about those things. Okay? You can tell that this pine's not dry, because pine would normally split a lot easier than this. Ay. So I don't know if that answered your question or not, what I just said. Split that after it dries. But the whole point of having a sawmill, your own personal sawmill, is that you can cut any kind of wood you want. If you need a tabletop and you want it to look beefy, and you cut it 2-3 inches thick, or a bar top, you can't buy that at Lowe's. You got to have that custom cut, and that's why you go to a guy like me, or you know, a lot of other guys who cut with their own sawmill, because you can get wood custom cut that you can't get cut anywhere else, or you can't buy anywhere else, I should say. And the people who understand, there's 2 reasons to buy a sawmill. 1, you understand how to save money with it by being able to cut, and 2, you have an abundance of wood that you can get your hands on to make lumber. Okay? Nobody buys a sawmill to cut firewood. If they do, they're fools. Stack this stuff in the garage then and let it dry good for next year, and then I'll have a bunch of kindling. Some of the bigger stuff I'm going to cut with the chainsaw. Alright, so just to go over that again, and here's where you guys in a big hurry change the channel. But if you want to learn something, just listen. To go over it again, nominal size, in other words, number size, right? 2x4s are a full 2x4, if that's what you want to cut. What you get at the store is 1.5 inches by 3.5. Okay, it's not 2 by 4. It's 1.5 by 3.5. The next size is 1.5 for 2 by 6 would be 1.5 by 5.5. So just learn that system, but know that when you get to a 12-inch board, it changes to 11.25 rather than 11.5. Okay, that's one system. Then the quarter system. If you're working with 1/4-inch boards, 1/2-inch boards, or 2 quarters, 1/4, 2 quarters, 3 quarters is 3 quarters. 4 quarters is a 1-inch board. 5 quarters an inch and a quarter board, and even that can also be screwed up in dimensions if it's planed. Now sometimes you can buy 5/4 boards that are planed and they are 5 quarters. In other words, they're a full 1.25 inches, and then you can buy 5 quarters that is planed and it's 1 1/8 inches. It's not a full 1.25 inches or even 1 inch. That's the problem with furniture lumber. You never know who cut it, what mill's making it. There's not a real standard for that. But what you cut and what thicknesses you make, just hear what I said, is up to you. You can make it any size you want because you have a custom mill. That's the whole point of it. And if you know anything about construction, and this is where this comes in real handy. If you know stuff about construction and you have a sawmill, oh man, you're twice as far ahead of the crowd when it comes to figuring out what's going to happen. I wish I would have had this sawmill years ago when I was a kid starting out in the construction business, because I'll tell you what, it would have saved me a fortune because what I used to do is I used to build houses in my garage. And how did I do that? Well, I used to cut headers, door sills, jacks, king studs, the joists. I cut all kind of stuff in the garage and sent it out to the job in a package. The reason I did that is so we could work on rainy days. This way here I could work no matter what the weather was in the garage. We used to make trusses, doors, and all kind of things. So if you know something about construction, like one guy wrote me saying that he got a sawmill, or he's going to be getting a sawmill, and they're going to be building a little cabin. That is an ideal situation. If you've got wood on a piece of property and you're going to build a cabin, and you buy a sawmill and set it up there to build the cabin, in my opinion, you couldn't do any better. That's the best way to handle that kind of thing. Well, guys, I'm not going to bore you to death here with me chopping firewood. And if I misspoke about anything, I'm sure some of you guys can straighten me out, and also leave it in the comments so that the people who don't know can pick up on it. I know one of the guys answered this question, and I don't remember everything he said. I know he said about easier to work with if it's full-size boards, and something else, but what he said was right, and I agree with what he said. So, read the comments as well. And there's a lot of guys out there who know how to do this stuff. When somebody starts telling you you must do this and you must do that, you must be talking to a government bureaucrat, okay? Don't listen to people say you must do this and you must do that, because I've been the exception to the rule my whole life. I don't like listening to other people who tell me things. You should do it this way, you should do it that way. Now, if I ask a question, how can I do this, or what the best way of doing this, like I asked about the copper coat that I bought, I got some great answers from that. People who didn't know didn't say nothing, but guys who used it, gave me some good advice, and I'm going to take that advice to heart, because I believe the guys who told it to me are, not out there trying to get a feather in their cap. They're out there trying to help people. You can hear the chickens in the background. They're having a fun time. I'm glad that they're in there. My wife loves having the chickens. They're her babies. So it's fun to watch her with them. And we enjoy the eggs, that's for sure. Alright guys, I have a little bit more here. I want to cut this, so I'm going to be running my chainsaw. You don't need to hear that. So, like I say, if I can help you in any other way, just leave messages. I'm starting to stiffen the heck up. I noticed that a lot of people, to clean up burn stuff, and I don't have a problem with somebody burning stuff, but right now, this time of the year, especially where I live, is very bad for fires. If there's a forest fire, it'll go through really quick, because right now the leaves are dry and everything. So even though it's easy to burn stuff to get rid of it, but you run into a problem where you know, I don't want to have some kind of a forest fire. So what I do is I take everything to the trash place that I can, unless I can cut it up and use it. Almost all wood I'll cut up for some kind of kindling of some sort. Little pieces of screening or mesh like this comes in handy at times, but you end up with way too much of it, and I'm sure you farmers out there know that. So I try not to keep any more of this than I have to as well. Although as soon as I throw it away, I'm going to wish I had it. But so now everything's cleaned up. A little bit of sawdust isn't going to matter. So that's that. I do got to put the mesh underneath the chicken coop there later, but I'm not doing it right now. I want to get up there and start cleaning up some of my... The other day, one of my friends borrowed the backhoe for a couple of hours, and when he brought it back, this is the dirt that was in it. Now, you guys know it took me a couple of hours to spread all these pine things around here, this pine stuff, and I'm trying to keep things so that it's not muddy. And it may not be a big deal, you know, to have to clean out the bucket, but that's the whole point. When I lent it to him, the bucket was clean because I was using it to put firewood in it. Now I got to go clean the bucket out, you know, and even if it's a matter of just taking it and dumping it in the woods, that's not the point. It's that I have to do it after lending somebody something that would have cost, you know, maybe $100 an hour to rent, or $50 an hour. These are the things that annoy me.